For the longest time, Blair's always been that odd one out descendant, requiring setup to get the most out of him. Setup that takes time compared to other descendants who don't need to and can just blast away with the press of a button or two. And while Ultimate Blair's release did do a lot to help him out with his newer red mods, it was always hard to recommend Blair in the harder content as he just didn't do enough when compared to the rest of the cast. Now though, with so much of his current arsenal getting buffed in the latest hotfix, his Backdraft mod feels fantastic again, so it's about time that we talked about why Blair is worth gearing up, along with what makes him so strong and unique. So in today's video we'll be breaking down my optimised Backdraft Blair build, who's designed to hit for massive crits, as well as massive weak point damage, and is perfect for those stubborn targets. We've got the testing, modules, a lot of weaponry ideas, Arche tuning and components all to come, so if all that sounds good to you, then let's get to it. Alright then, so let's kick it off with the basics. Why should you run Backdraft Blair? Well, Backdraft belongs to a very small niche, being one of very few builds in the game to equally benefit from weapon damage as well as going into skill damage to combine and make your total DPS output. Now, in most cases you'll either build into skill damage or into weapon damage, like Serena and Inez with their mobbing builds or Glay and Enzo with their bullet spam. Backdraft though finds itself in the middle, being able to do some nice damage over time through the use of flame pits, but also benefiting from those pits being out as each one of those buffs your weapon stats. Backdraft changes Blair's initial passive of skill crit damage and rate to one that it provides an additive 10% crit damage to all weapons, along with an additive crit rate boost of 5% per flame zone, capping at 5 and giving a total of 25%. With each of these boosts being additive, they are affected by multiplicative boosts, meaning even weapons like Malevolent with its 1% crit rate can be built for crit should you wish to. But the fun doesn't stop there, as having the zones out allows you to activate your skill 2 called Extinguish, absorbing the zone's power and fueling even more buffs. Firearm attack and explosive attack boosts of 20%, a 25% movement speed increase, but the coolest part is your weak point damage being increased by 6% per zone recalled, stacking up to 5 once again, meaning that we're going to get an extra 0.3x base multiplier on your weak point damage, once again affected by modules and Arche tuning buffs. That's a lot of info and buffs, but to summarise, not only are you getting a large area saturated with burns and damage over time, you're also getting increases to your weapons based damage, crit rate and weak point, while also gaining an unlimited amount of MP and faster movement speed. Now while you will see less crit rate compared to the likes of Haley, you will be much more faster and making Blair the perfect gun descendant to hit crits and move on to that next pack. So let's talk about modules to get the most out of his weapon and his Arche setup. Well, the build breaks down into 4 main categories with durability, skill damage, cooldown and quality of life. So starting things off with the durability, we'll be running 2 HP mods on here in combination with the component cores to make sure that we never have any difficulty with staying upright. Increased HP and Battle of Stamina take the slots here, with stamina doubling up into helping with our skill durations. Now, not only will this help with increasing the life of our flame zones, saving us the need to keep topping these up at all times, but also works nicely with our extinguish buffs, allowing us to focus on the shooting much more. Now as for our skill damage, our flame zones don't have that much modifier to their name, making it very difficult to get a lot of damage out of them. This means that we can still build nicely into them, making it so it's going to be helping us to get that kill faster, rather than them actually being the final blow themselves. Running Focus on Fire for our skill power boost along with Dimension Specialist for our modifier gives us all the skill damage that we can achieve without running into the amplification or critical mods. And we'll talk about the reactors a little bit later in this video, but if you do struggle to get that cooldown roll on your gear there, you can always swap Dimension Specialist for Focus on Dimension, lessening the need for perfect gear rolls inside this video. Now onto the cooldown side of things, and we'll be looking to hit the cooldown cap of 90% via the use of Nimble Fingers, MP Conversion and Multi-Talented, with the first two giving us the easy 62.1% cooldown by themselves, and Multi-Talented providing another 20.5% cooldown when we activate our Dimension abilities. Now fortunately for us, as well as Blair, 3 of our 4 skills are going to be Dimension based, meaning that we can do this fairly reliably, only requiring us to use our Extinguish after casting either our Skill 1 or Skill 4, so that we never trigger the attribute bonus in error. The reason we'll want heavy cooldown here though, especially after I mentioned about the duration limiting when it comes to our downtime periods, is so that we can always start a fight with our skill 4 being ready. Casting this into a group is the best way for us to plant flame zones down for extra damage, but also get up to our full buffs, ready for us to start blasting away. For bosses, this isn't much of an issue, but in excessive mobbing scenarios like Purge or 400%, keeping flame zones nearby is absolutely crucial for max DPS. Lastly, we have our quality of life category designed to round out the rest of the build, making it much easier to use. Skill extension is a great way to boost our durations in combination with Battle of Stamina, allowing us to push closer to 50% boost, with the full ideal build making our zones last over 24 seconds each, and our extinguish boost lasting 32.5 seconds, perfect for holding down a room or for clearing a boss. Skill expansion is next up, boosting our skill ranges by 92.3%, allowing our flame zones to reach out and cover much more area, which is ideal for covering full groups in the juicing damage over time goodness. Entire floors will get covered in fire, which enemies will have to cross to be able to get to you. Lastly, as this is a firearm based build, we will be rocking Shock Focus, giving us that 15% firearm attack boost at the cost of 15% of our skill modifiers. Now, this is a pretty hefty downside to our flame zone damage, but as that's not the main focus of the DPS when it comes to the build, it is absolutely worth the trade and for the extra firearm damage that we can deal. And that's the build. I do want to point out that I tried swapping multi-talented for both veteran tactics and hyper-focus, and while they weren't necessarily bad in the end, I always found myself gravitating back to the consistency that multi-talented provided. Vet tactics never felt like it procced when I needed it most, and hyper-focus, while it's pretty consistent to trigger due to Blair's 20% base crit rate and the amount of space consumed with fire, didn't provide the largest buff in the world and lacked the ability to be able to cast Deadly Cuisine on a short cooldown. Reactors to an extent are quite important, with the best DPS coming from mounting your go-to weaponry and sticking to that category of weaponry, thus giving you the most skill power behind all of your flame zones. Now, while this isn't crucial for the build to work, it is still extra damage and it's worth going for if you do have the ability to do so. That does mean that we'll be rocking a Burning Phase Reactor, helping with fire and dimension abilities, perfect for those flame zone DPS boosts. Now, roles wise at the bottom, as it's primarily focused on firearms being the damage dealer, we'll be running the typical cooldown and duration up rolls, allowing us to hit the cooldown cap as well as providing a nice buff to our skill and buff durations. I will say this build doesn't necessarily need a perfect reactor to work, but it is going to be the best practice to look out for one while you're farming. Now, swapping over to the components, I went back and forth on a few combinations with Hunter being in there, Annihilation or even a couple of purple unique sets helping with firearm damage. But the ones I settled for were a 2-piece of Firebrand combined with a 2-piece of Shell Crusher, furthering our skill ranges and durations while also gaining the 5% fire rate buff from Shell Crusher, one of the best 2 pieces in the game right now. Trying for max HP rolls as much as I could, I'd recommend going for the auxiliary power and sensor for the Firebrand, and then memory and processor being from the Shell Crusher. Now, depending on the weaponry that you choose to rock, you can swap out the Firebrand pieces for other gear sets to help with damage. So for example, the Distorted Resolve set as a 2-piece does help to boost assault rifle and SMG attacks, perfect if you plan on using the Thundercage or Excava builds that I've recently posted on the channel. Now, as for the core rolls, the typical HP and defense rolls will satisfy all that you need and handles all the content that you need it to, including farming Purge 10 for your weapon cores. For substats on each component though, Blair doesn't struggle with MP issues due to how the Extinguish behaves. This means that you can run resistances in place of MP rolls, giving you even better survivability. HP, defense and resistances will make you quite tanky, allowing you to absorb the damage as you hold down that trigger. Now, usually at this point of the build video I'd be swapping to the weaponry, talking about what 1 or 2 options would make the build and that you should be running, but as this build really catapults a lot into that relevancy, let's understand why the Arche tuning is so important first, and then we can list all the options that finalise the build. Now, with it being a weapon focused build, we'll ideally be heading to the left side of the board, picking up boosts to our damage and the like. We'll also be discussing 2 versions of the board, one with being a basic firearm damage and one for being for multi-hit, perfect for those weapon builds where you want to be able to get the best of both worlds. Now, the main nodes that we will want to grab on either board will be things like crit damage, crit rate, firearm attack boost, and then lastly the top left mutant cell ready for us to slot the very cell that makes Blair fantastic. Defense neutralization really elevates this build to the next level and is the main reason why I love to run Blair as a gun descendant nowadays. Upon landing a skill attack, enemies will now be debuffed with a minus 50% to defense and 30% to all elemental resistances. So by starting our fights with our Cuisine Fireball, not only will that initial explosion trigger the reduction to defenses, but the lingering fire pools, should other enemies spawn into their radius or walk into it, will then also get those reductions. Adding to that, if we're also using focus rounds or an elemental attack on a gun, which let's be honest you should absolutely be currently doing, you will also be doing so much more damage to targets on both fronts, with the defense being great for the base firearm attack and the elemental damage loving the resistant shreds. If you've ever wanted a reason to farm out your first mutant cell or your next box if you haven't opened this one before, then this is all the reason that you need. Now, due to how Blair can utilise so much of the current arsenal due to his boost to base crit rates and weak point damage, there isn't many weapons that we can consider terrible for using on him. Truly Deadly Arson can take advantage of the burns from the flame zones, ATAMS loves the crit boost to make it more consistent, Kingsguard Lance is great for holding down an area and letting the game do the farming for you, and even the Fallen Hope can be ran multi-crit with the buffs that Blair grants to it. But if I had to put it down to the top 3 weapons that I've used with Backdraft Blair and got the most value out of them, then it would be the Thundercage, the Perforator, and the Enduring Legacy / the Albion Cavalry gun, depending on the content that you're running. Now, Thundercage has loved being a crit weapon for the longest time, loving the general rounds versions of crit damage mods having massive multipliers, but it never had the base rate for consistent critically hitting. Now with Backdraft Blair though, not only does it get it consistent, but you can also open up weak point damage as an extra multiplier and have the movement speed to perfectly pair with the SMG platform, allowing for crazy fast mobbing, especially in Purge 9 where they're going to be weak to electric. If you're after the Thundercage build and the maths behind it all, I recently did post a video breaking it all down, but here's going to be a copy of the build for you to use. Perforator, on the other hand, absolutely loves landing critical shots, with most of its unique effective damage coming from landing a critical shot on a weak point. With a base rate of 20% though, and the crit rate mods being smaller than that of the general rounds modules, it's quite difficult to get this gun feeling great outside of using a crit based descendant. Fortunately though, after the last hotfix buffing its weak point damage and Blair buffing base crit rates ready for the modules to boost higher, it's going to be a powerhouse of a gun for in his hands that he can use especially well. Now while Nazistra's Devotion is also going to be worth a mention, Perforator is the better general use gun with its mobbing and bossing potential, so that's the one that's going to get recommended here. Once again, build-wise a full explanation exists on the channel already, but here's going to be a screenshot for you to use. Lastly, I want to talk about our two main LMGs, the Old King itself, which is the Enduring Legacy, and the Albion Cavalry gun, both being great for separate reasons. The Legacy recently had a buff to its elemental attack so it can do fire attack as standard, but also got a very respectful weak point damage bump, making Blair's Extinguish buff and weak point modules do so much more for the gun's DPS. Uniquely, as the Legacy also gets a firearm attack buff from hitting a burning enemy, along with shredding fire resistance further through quenching, the longer you fire this gun the more damage it will keep doing. If only the gun had a green core slot for us to be able to upgrade its fire rate, this would absolutely be back in contention for meta. I'll be doing a video breakdown on this build soon, but here's going to be a screenshot of the build just for the time being, should you wish to rock it. And so that brings us to the Albion Cavalry gun being the better of the two LMGs for mobbing, and probably Blair's go-to for Purge 10 runs. At base, the gun has a 7% crit rate with another 33% base rate coming from hitting marked enemies, allowing the other unique effect of splitting off to deal damage doing work. Now with the flame zones though, we can add an additional 25% base crit rate to that gun, putting up to 65% crit rate on marked enemies, with more boost coming from slotting in modules that help boost that rate further. The gun also has a decent multi-hit modifier of 0.45x, making it decent enough to run as multi-crit, and Extinguish then boosts the weak point multiplier from 1x to 1.3x, meaning we can now benefit more from the weak point modules inside the build. Overall, both LMGs are fantastic to run on Blair, and worth to use depending on the weapon category that you do wish to use. Now even though I've mentioned just these weapons specifically, that doesn't mean that other weapons cannot be used. Feel free to be able to actually mix and match with depending on the actual guns that you do enjoy using inside the game. So now it's over to our Inversion Reinforcements, and there's some great buffs for us to pick up, but please keep in mind that these will reset once Season 3 drops. We might see some changes to these nodes like we did with Season 2 Episode 2 dropping. If a lot changes on this board, I will make sure to update the pinned comments so that you have all the nodes that you need. As for what we can currently pick up though, the reinforcement can buff up our reload speeds, our elemental damage, and also give us extra durability in fights. In the hunt category, we'll be grabbing Ammo's System, where upon landing 5 critical shots we'll have a 25% additive bonus to our reload speed, which can also be boosted via Arche tuning. In our attribute category, we'll be picking up any of the focus rounds that match the element of the gun that we're using, or to the weakness of the enemies that we'll be fighting inside a Purge. For example, in Purge 10, you'll always want to grab chill rounds here, further boosting our damage output, and combined with the capstone of enhanced focus rounds also shredding resistances as we shoot, you'll ramp yourself up to do even more damage as you hold down that trigger. Lastly, we have a few options, but the one I've chosen is Selective Cellular Stimulation, granting a boost of HP every 30 seconds, making it much harder for us to be taken down inside of a fight. Other options, should you not need this boost though, will be things like Antibody Explosion or even Adrenaline Rush, with the former helping with more resistances and the latter helping you move much more faster inside the battlefield, so feel free to be able to move this last point around as you see fit. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up for my go-to Backdraft Blair build, perfect for taking advantage of defense neutralization and weapon cores, along with the latest hotfix making more weapons viable to run. Now while Haley can get her crit rate up much higher than Blair can, he's much more efficient at reducing defenses on targets as well as buffing up these base weak point damage so that you can hit that much harder. Haley may be a one-trick pony, but Blair can do it all and then some. And so this is a section I want to hear from you. What are your current thoughts on Blair? Do you prefer to run him for skill or gun damage? And then lastly, we'll be hitting Season 3 when it drops in a few days' time. Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on the next video.